Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
Very carefully choosing his words, reading very carefully from prepared text there. Trump's comments are sparked by the terror attacks in San Bernardino, California, and Paris as well. And as we discussed yesterday, the two shooters visited a local gun range for target practices right before the attack. This was an instructor at that gun range and what he saw.
How are you able to determine what somebody's intents are after they visit your place of business? It's hard to be able to judge people based on an appearance. Americans look different.
Well, what do you think? What would you do if you saw these two people in a gun range using the kind of weapons that they used during the attack? To discuss this further, let's bring in today's roundtable. Joining us is former Deputy Staff Secretary to President Bill Clinton, Attorney David Goodfriend, also with us, columnist for the Fiscal Times, Liz Peek. Thanks so much for being here, you guys.
Thanks for having us.
All right, Liz, what do you think about the gun instructor's comments?
Well, he's correct. And, you know, to some degree, people who rail about trying to put restrictions on sales of guns and the use of guns have got to kind of step back here and say, wait a minute, do I really want people intruding in their ability to practice or whatever? I would think, honestly, that common sense might have raised some red flags in this case. But I don't think we can lay the intelligence shortfall here at the foot of an instructor of someone who is allowing people to assert their Second Amendment rights. That's something we hear a great deal about. So, look, common sense, yes, but in terms of sort of the order of the day, I'm not surprised that he didn't do anything.
Well, I don't want to necessarily blame this guy, but I want to kind of talk about this in the new kind of state we're living in of the world these days, and I would be very suspicious of them or somebody who was in there with a shaved head, dressed with swastika tattoos, looking like a skinhead, or somebody in there who looks who's not dressed, maybe with dreadlocks and pants down around their ankles.
So unless they look like you.
Well, I go to gun ranges.
David, you want
it's
to
a very
weigh in?
close-knit community, and a lot of times you talk to people. I think we as a society need to be more.
But you're saying someone
oriented.
who appears to be,
I'm not saying
look
call
like
the police,
they're practicing Islam,
but have a conversation.
Is automatically suspicious. David, would you like to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I mean, what sparked this conversation was Donald Trump saying he would stop one religious group from entering the United States. So you're talking right now about characteristics of the way someone looks. Can you tell that there's a threat by the way someone looks? I think most law enforcement veterans would tell you it's very hard to tell the way someone looks and how they behave. And that's all you have to do is look at the shooter in Newtown, Connecticut, look at the shooter in Charleston, South Carolina.
I think the shooter in Charleston, South Carolina is a perfect example. The jacket that he was wearing with the South African separatist flags on it, those are signals that we as a society need to be more aware of in 2015.
Okay, but just imagine if Keith Ellison, a congressman from Minnesota who's a Muslim, imagine if he had come forward after those shootings and said, well, clearly white Christian men are a risk, so clearly we have to take their guns away.
White Christian men are different than men who wear
No, they're not, because the
separatists.
majority of crime that's done in this country is done by white Christian men.
What did Donald Trump say? Donald Trump said we need to stop Muslims. He didn't differentiate between terrorists or people who had a history. He said an entire religious group. I want you to understand what that means. Just put the shoe on the other foot and ask yourself if someone like Keith Ellison or Donald Trump even said, white Christian men are responsible for a lot of shootings in this country. I think we should stop admitting them into the country. What would be the reaction? My God, the entire country would be up in arms. Who says Donald Trump has the right, let alone the fact, by the way, he's endangering Americans all over the world with his rhetoric. He is endangering our strategy of outsmarting and cornering ISIS. And he might as well become an ISIS dream child.
I think a lot of people
exactly what they hope
are concerned about the very thing that you're bringing up, David. Lizzo, you brought up that common sense, though, may have, you're saying basically a common sense approach that maybe the guy could have called. What do you mean by common sense? Can you clarify that?
Well, despite the numbers that you guys are perhaps going to cite, the truth is what we're worried about in this country right now is radicalized Islamic terrorists. And if people come to your gun range and are shooting guns of a nature, these long rifles, that don't appear to be for self-protection, I think someone might actually, sort of take some interest in that. But I'd like to talk about what Trump actually said, because the response to his statement that he'd like to have this ban on Muslims entering the country has been nearly hysterical from everybody. And in truth, what he said was, let's take a time out just to see whether our policies are the right policies. And I think when you have visa imperfections, how we call them.
So why not all groups, Liz? Why not do that for anyone wanting to enter the United States? Why did he single out Muslims, Liz?
Well, he singled out Muslims because he knew we'd all be talking about it today all day long, and it would also help his poll numbers go up as well. Although I have a much different theory that he's just trying to take himself out of the race and begging the GOP to make it all stop.
John has some great theories.
I don't think he actually wants to be president. He wants to go back to his business. And by the way, this cost him a little business today. Some companies working with him in the Middle East on golf courses said, no thanks, Mr. Trump. We're going to find business elsewhere.
All right, there's so much more to come. Liz, David, stick around. We're going to have part 2 of our roundtable coming up. Dr. Ben Carson's new ad is a powerful one, but does it have enough power to help him climb back up in the polls? And we want to know what you think about Donald Trump's ban, or his proposal to ban allowing Muslims into the United States. Tweet us or leave us a comment on our Facebook page. We'll be right back. Republican presidential candidate Dr. Ben Carson released a new campaign today. Maybe you didn't see it because all the talk's been about Trump, but we'd like you to take a look at it, at least a portion of it.
All right, I kind of got chills again. I saw that ad this morning amidst all this discussion of hate and racial profiling and all this other stuff. It felt like a nice warm hug from Dr. Ben Carson, although he has said some pretty inflammatory things himself. Joining us again for the roundtable, former Deputy Staff Secretary to President Bill Clinton, Attorney David Goodfriend, and columnist for the Fiscal Times, Liz Peek. So we have this ad from Dr. Ben Carson, and in my opinion, David, it might be one of the best ads of this election cycle. But it appears to be kind of disjointed with the conversation that the country is having right now. Ben Carson has had a precipitous drop in the polls. Is there any chance in hell, and the millions of dollars he's spending in Iowa, that this ad is going to make a difference in his campaign?
Oh, I think so. I mean, he appeals to a very important part of the Republican primary voting base, and that is evangelical Christians and believers who really see him as the best spokesperson for their worldview. And I think he's truly a gentleman. I mean, I can disagree with everything he says, but I can never accuse him of being mean-spirited or being derogatory in his comments. That certainly has a place, I would like to think, in American politics. And remember, nobody has actually cast a vote or expressed a view in a caucus yet. And I think we have a lot of voting to have happen in the next, roughly 90 days.
Liz, what do you think? Is he trying to be a uniter, kind of differentiate himself from Donald Trump right now?
Oh, I think absolutely. And from Ted Cruz and other people who have basically profited from his slippage in the polls. Look, Ben Carson would like to keep the focus on his personal story, which is wonderful, and not so much on what I think most people now consider his shortcomings in terms of dealing with foreign affairs. I mean, I think we went from being sort of all very enamored of what this man has brought to the table. I totally agree that he's a gentleman and he's also very smart and accomplished. But when the conversation shifted to the Middle East and to foreign policy, it was pretty clear that he was over his head. And so I frankly don't think it's going to do all that much good. Americans now cite terrorism and security as their number one issue. That may not continue at that point, but right now that's where we are. So this is a good reminder that there's other things to talk about and that he's a lovely guy, but I don't think it'll reinstate him.
David, you mentioned the Iowa caucuses a few moments ago, and I want to ask you this question because you know this a lot better than most of Americans. People who don't live in Iowa haven't experienced the caucus situation. It's very different than the rest of us who go to a voting booth anytime we want during the day or cast an absentee ballot. You have to show up at a certain time. You have to do this in a very public fashion. Do you think the polls in Iowa with Donald Trump are starting to change more so because people realize that they're going to have to go up there and actually raise their hand and support Donald Trump in a public fashion?
Oh, that's exactly what I mean. I mean, picture this. You're in a high school gym in rural Iowa, and a caucus is taking place. And in one corner, the people who support Donald Trump stand. In another corner, the people who support Jeb Bush. Another corner, it's Ben Carson. And what you have to do if you're a caucus goer is go and stand with the group that you support. So you look around the room. There's a lot of, social psychology involved in this. You look around the room and you might see that your neighbors or your friends are standing somewhere else, and you change your mind. You're going to go stand with them. It's very fluid. It's a remarkable element of American politics. But to your point, the response that I give over the phone to a pollster may be very different from what I actually end up doing in a caucus, where I'm looking around the room and I'm comparing my actions to my friends and neighbors, and who knows what the outcome will be.
Last word to you. We have about 30 seconds, Liz.
Well, I think that's right. I'm not sure anyone's embarrassed to align themselves with Donald Trump. I know that, in these circles where we all live, I mean, he's very controversial and so forth. But I have to tell you, my great revelation this week is that in New York City, which is obviously not fertile ground for either far right, or I should say the far right, guess what? Some people are starting to talk about voting for Trump. And I'm sort of astonished, but I think he has made, as bizarre as this whole performance has been, I think he has actually gained ground with some people who just are tired of all the things that Obama represents. And who really cannot bring themselves to vote for Hillary Clinton. That's really the issue.
Listen, David, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up next on Newsmax Now, in the wake of the San Bernardino terror attacks, residents are reacting to Trump's idea for a ban on Muslims into this country. Do they support it, or are they against it? Find out next when Newsmax Now continues.